Alright, we are doing math tonight. Let me show you what I got going on here. Okay. So, I was talking to Jeff Goyne online. He was giving me shit about flat earth stuff. And he said, let's see here, Foot Flyer on his website even. Let's see, where is it? He drew up, he's talking about Polaris, blah, 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 but he's talking about Polaris, and he's saying, yeah, if the Earth were flat, we should be able to triangulate the distance to Polaris, and he picked me here in Chicago, and him in Orlando, and he took, he determined the height of Polaris using the latitudes and the distance. And so I recreated his thing here. And I am, recreated his stuff. We're checking some things out here. So let's see here, printed some shit out. Okay, he's in Orlando, Chicago. It's, I looked it up on Google. The straight line distance between Orlando and Chicago is 1,154 miles. They're both, relatively close in longitude. Roughly we'll say like 85 degrees west would be in the middle of these two going up. So for Polaris, and yeah, it's the same thing on this map. This is bigger, but yeah, this would be Orlando here, Chicago, North Pole. Yeah, so we're the latitudes. So you look up, anyways. Okay, so you look up at Polaris. If you can see Polaris, you can determine what your latitude is. Anyone here in the northern hemisphere, right, anybody that can see Polaris, you can see it down to the equator. You can't see it past the equator because you're looking, when you're at the equator, let's say you're at 1 degree north of the equator, your Polaris is right 1 degree above the horizon. So past that, it's under, you can't see it anymore. So if you can see Polaris, you're in the northern hemisphere. Okay, so what he did and what I recreated here is this line is representing a flat Earth. So Orlando, 1,154 miles from Chicago, and then you got, so it's flat Earth, it's Orlando, Chicago, and the North Pole. And Polaris directly above the North Pole. So we took 1,154 miles, Orlando. It is 28.5 degrees latitude. That is the angle of Polaris, 28.5 degrees. Chicago, 1,154 miles away from Orlando. Latitude, 41.8 degrees. That's the angle that you can see Polaris, and that's the latitude of Chicago. So, by taking distance from Chicago to Orlando, this angle from Orlando to Polaris, this angle, Chicago to Polaris, we have this angle, so that gives us this angle. Based on, so we make it into a triangle. This side is 1154. We know those angles. Based on that, we just go to, well, yeah, you can do the math, but I went to a freaking math calculator, a trig calculator website that I don't have saved in my tabs anymore here. I gotta go back and find that. But I used a trig calculator, calculator online, where I just plugged in that side, the two angles, and I give you all the rest of the shit. So if this distance between Orlando and Chicago, 1,154 miles, if this distance is correct, and these two angles are correct, then this gives us the other angle. We can get that angle because we know that angle. So we have all three angles here based on this distance and all these angles. We come up with the distance from Orlando to Polaris is 3,343 miles. Distance Chicago to Polaris, 2,393 miles. Chicago to Polaris. And then Polaris is supposed to be directly over the North Pole. That gives us that 90 degrees. And based on these two angles, we get that angle. And that gives us, and because we have this distance, that gives us the other distances from Chicago to the North Pole being 1,784 miles, and then the North Pole to Polaris, directly above it, based on this, should be 1,595.39 miles. Yeah, I don't know. That's the math I got. This is the first time I'm actually playing with this right now. So let me know what you think.